Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to Law Excellence Daily Hindu News Analysis. Today we'll be discussing some important articles from examination point of view that appeared on 2nd June 2020. Now, before starting our discussion, we will look into a small announcement. Admissions have started for online live general studies PCM batch, prelims cum mains batch for 2021. For any queries, please call to this number 90521 93939, and we have a residential facility too in Hyderabad campus. Today's personality for discussion is Naga Bhairava Jaiprakash Narayan. I think he's a very well known personality. He's a former IAS officer. He served for almost 16 years, then he resigned and he started a political movement called Lok Satta Party movement. Then later it became a political party. Now, this person in his 16-year career, he served in various roles. For example, he served as joint collector of various districts in Andhra Pradesh. Then even he served as a secretary to then Andhra Pradesh Chief Minister N.T. Ramarao. And this person is known for his various reforms in social, administrative, and in political sectors. He always strived hard to bring in good governance in the functioning of administration. And he was very much instrumental in bringing electoral reforms and to reduce corruption in the political system. And he was so actively involved in the enactment process of Right to Information Act that was passed in 2005. In addition to this, he was a member of Second Administrative Reforms Commission that was constituted by the central government in the year 2005. And he is the person who drafted a report on ethics, administrative ethics. And he is also a member of National Rural Health Mission of India. There was a task force that was constituted in the year 2005 for which he was a member. He also brought in various reforms aimed at empowering parents in school governance structure, and he was very much instrumental in development of high-tech city in Hyderabad to facilitate the growth of software industry. And he also brought in various reforms to ensure speedy justice through rural courts. He is an inspirational figure for many civil aspirants and even civil servants, and maybe this personality we can use in our GS paper for ethics. As usual, our daily discussion is categorized into two types. One is daily editorial enrichment program, which covers editorial articles that appeared in Hindu, and other is targeted news analysis, which cover those articles that appeared in other pages of Hindu. And we have given the page numbers here of Hyderabad and Bangalore edition. Please have a look into it. You can download the link for notes in PDF format and it is available in the description below. And daily we are giving 10 MCQs test where you can log in into elearn.login and you can write free daily current affairs test. Now, the first article for today's discussion is India, China, and fortifying the Africa outreach. It's a very important article from examination point of view. A direct question can be asked in the exam. Now, India and China both are providing medical assistance, financial aid to African continent to enhance their clout. But there is a difference in the approaches they adopt towards Africa. India has a different approach. They mostly follow a soft approach, and China, on the other hand, follows a hardened approach. Now, the article tries to distinguish the approaches adopted by these two countries towards Africa and what are the advantages of these approaches and what are the issues involved in it. So now we will look into the syllabus mapping. It comes under main GS paper 2, international relations. Under this, bilateral, regional and global groupings involving India and or affecting India's interest. And the issue that is article trying to address is African outreach. Now, what is the dimension covered? Approach of India and China towards Africa. So, what is the differences in the approaches adopted by India and China? Now, the learning objective is to know about the Beijing's donation diplomacy towards Africa. So, the article mentions a term called donation diplomacy. So, the approach adopted by Beijing towards Africa is called as donation diplomacy. And what is that? We will look in the next slide. Now, to understand the second objective, India's approach towards Africa. These are the learning objectives. We will look into what the article is trying to say. The article mentions that COVID-19 pandemic has created a devastating effects across the world, and especially it is high in African continent because the continent is having a depth of resources, especially the medical resources. They don't have the medical equipment, like example protective equipment, or they don't have the drugs, and they don't have the masks to deal with the pandemic. So obviously they are in a need for an external aid. And India and China, who are long standing partners of Africa, now they want to increase their outreach by providing medical assistance to various African countries. However, but there are some differences between the approach adopted by India and China in their outreach mechanisms. And the article is trying to mention what are the differences in the approaches adopted by India and China. For example, China follows a hard approach, whereas India follows a soft approach. So, what are the characteristics of the hard approach that China adopts towards Africa? For example, China always uses its political influence or its political heft, or it uses its money power to influence African policies. And it always strives to establish state to state relationship. And most of the time, China aims to extract resources and aggressively investing in the infrastructure development. But whereas India, on the other hand, adopts a soft approach. And what are the characteristics of this soft approach? One is building local capacities. India always tries to empower local people, and India always wants to establish a strong people to people ties. It is not like China, which always wants to establish state to state ties, and it is never be close to the African elites. It is always close to the all sections of the society, especially India. But China always tries to establish a strong linkage with elites of the African society. This is a fundamental difference in the approach adopted by China and India. And the China's approach is called as donation diplomacy. Is called as a donation diplomacy in the article. Donation diplomacy. There is a difference also in the nature of the aid that both countries are providing to African countries to deal with this pandemic. For example, the nature of the aid provided by China, they mostly focus on providing protective equipment, what you call providing testing kits, ventilators, and even medical masks to African countries. But whereas India, we are known as pharmacy of the world. So we produce cheap and quality drugs. So we are providing them hydroxychloroquine and paracetamol tablets. And also we have started a new what you call a training portal, which we call EITC COVID-19. So under this platform, we are trying to provide training to healthcare professionals from Africa, and even India is providing training for healthcare professionals in SAARC nations too. There is also a difference in the aims of the two countries in providing medical assistance to African continent. For example, India. So what is the aim of India here? India wants this to use as an opportunity to demonstrate its willingness and capacity to shoulder more responsibility. That is the fundamental aim. And it wants to portray itself that even though it have limited resources, but it came forward to provide some medical and financial assistance to Africa. This is because it wants to show itself as a responsible and reliable global stakeholder. But whereas on the other hand, China have a different set of aims. One is it wants to promote, it wants to portray itself as a leading provider of humanitarian assistance. And it is also playing something called diversion tactics. It wants to shift the focus away from people talking about the origin of virus in Wuhan. So China wants this medical assistance to African countries to garner diplomatic support and cooperation from African countries on various issues in multilateral forum. For example, recently China no, got the support of African countries to win its candidates as head of the Food and Agriculture Organization and even in World Health Organization. So it wants to garner the support of African countries by providing medical assistance. Traditionally, the approach adopted by India towards Africa is based on strong socio cultural ties. It wants to enhance people to people ties. It's not similar to that of China. And we will be discussing in this slide some important aspects of India's relationship with Africa. Three important aspects here are diaspora and in peacekeeping forces and investment, trade, and educational linkages. For example, with respect to diaspora, Indian diaspora in Africa consists of nearly 3 million people, whereas African diaspora in India is almost 50,000. So we have strong people to people linkages. That's why India wants to strengthen people to people ties. And the trade, the bilateral trade, you can see the number. The bilateral trade between India and Africa is estimated to be around $70 billion. It's not a small amount, and it is been witnessing a growth in the last 15 years. Now, regarding the peacekeeping forces, and nearly 4,500 Indian soldiers are there on the ground in Africa under various peacekeeping missions. And regarding student educational linkages, India offers 900 scholarship to Africa students each year. And you can also see Indian owned operated companies are the second largest employers in Nigeria. And India is currently spending $7.5 billion on infrastructure projects in over 40 countries. It's not a small amount. What the article tries to conclude is that despite each country having its own advantages and challenges, now both countries need to adapt to the rising expectations and aspirations of the African people. Now we will look into the second article of today's discussion, Jammu, the pawn on the Kashmir chessboard. What the article is trying to say. The article tries to look into the contribution made by Jammu region, especially in the political matters, in the policy matters of the central government. It unconditionally supported the central government in various aspects, but now it is in a position to expect nothing out of its contribution. And it also looks into how central government is discriminating this region, and it also looks into various aspects how the recent policy changes that were brought in by Ministry of Home Affairs will be acting against the interest of this region, Jammu region. Now we will look into the syllabus mapping. It comes under mains GS paper 1 regionalism, and also it can be asked under GS paper 2 issues and challenges pertaining to the federal structure. And what is the issue here? It's a post abrogation of Article 370. What are the developments that happened after Article 370 abrogation? And the dimension is problems of Jammu region. What is the learning objective? To critically understand the benefits that will accrue to the Jammu region post the dilution of Article 370 and 35A. Now we will see what the article is trying to discuss. Jammu region historically is used as a protector of nationalism and also a protector of national security in Jammu and Kashmir by the Union government. Unfortunately, this policy approach adopted by the central government had lot of negative repercussions in political and economic aspirations of the Jammu region. Basically, Jammu region is a pluralistic society. It used to have Hindus, Sikhs, Dogras, and even Muslims. So it used to have that diversity. But because of these nationalistic aspirations which different groups followed, it witnessed lot of discrimination by the Kashmiri region, and also the region witnessed lot of polarization, which are two negative consequences of the approach adopted by the national government towards the Jammu region. The region expected some positive benefits by the central government because of its political stance which the region have taken. But unfortunately, the recent changes which the government has brought in will have negative consequences on social and economic aspects of the region. For example, the change in domicile status. Recently, the Jammu and Kashmir Civil Services Decentralization and Recruitment Act got amended, which altered the definition of domicile status. And because of this change in definition, it will surely result in loss of job opportunities for the people of Jammu region. And what is the change that was brought in this definition of domicile status? As per the new definition, any person who has resided in Jammu and Kashmir for 15 years, now they can be called as a resident of that particular place. And even a person who studied for 7 years continuously there can also be called as a resident. Even the sons and daughters of central government employees who are functioning, who are serving in the region, can also be called as a permanent resident. Now because of this change in definition, it will surely bring a loss of job opportunities to the people of Jammu region. This is one issue. And the other issue is that because of the change in domicile status, there are some apprehensions that people from West Pakistan, almost there are 2 lakh West Pakistan refugees in this region. Now these people might get some job opportunities too. And also, if you just observe the location of Jammu region, it is located very close to the mainland India. Now because of the change in domicile status, it might attract some youth from the nearby regions. So even because of this also, there might be a chance of loss in job opportunities. So this is the first apprehension, or first negative impact of the recent changes brought in by the central government. And the second one, Agrarian Reforms Act, which was abolished. Now because of the abolishing of this act, now people can come into the region and they can buy land, they can invest, and they can start real estate. And obviously, when the region is opened for investments and people with deep pockets, now they'll enter into the region, now they'll start investing. And because of this, the Jammu region economy and even the ecology of the region will be disturbed. And this is one more issue. And the third one, delimitation of the electoral constituency. It was believed that if the delimitation is done based on area, then it was felt that Jammu region will be going to get good political share in the union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. And it is also expected that the chief minister for the union territory of Jammu and Kashmir will be from this region. But what if the union government places a chief minister from outside the region? So these are the some issues bothering the Jammu region because of the recent changes brought in by the union government. Now we will see what will happen to this region after revoking of Article 370 on August 5th. These are the changes that will happen. One is, till now the region used to have a dual citizenship. Now they don't have any dual citizenship, and central laws can directly apply. And till now most of the central laws are exempted from its application. For example, Right to Information Act or some other acts. Now there is also no separate laws for Jammu and Kashmir, and Indian citizens from other states can buy land and property. And we have discussed in the previous slide that Agricultural Reforms Act was abolished. Now there won't be any two flags and elections every 5 years. Before that they used to have elections for 6 years. Now as usual they'll have elections for 5 years, and center can declare financial emergency under Article 360. Till now center don't have that authority to declare financial emergency in the state, but after Article 370 is revoked, now central government is empowered to do so, and police will be managed by the center. So these are some changes that were brought in after scrapping of Article 370. Now we will look into the next article, workforce habits. In this article, it is trying to look into the problems faced by the workforce because of the lockdown. And also it looks into the various steps taken by the central government and state governments to address the issues faced by the workforce, and what is the impact these steps had on the workforce. And it also comes with some solutions, some steps the government has to take to attract workforce back to the urban areas and to restart their work. Now the syllabus mapping is, it comes under mains GS paper 3, Indian economy and issues related to employment. It can also be asked under mechanisms, laws and policies for the welfare of vulnerable sections. And what is the issue? It is about COVID-19 lockdown impact, and the dimension covered here is challenges faced by the workforce and what are the steps government has to take. And if you see the learning objective, the learning objective is to understand the problems faced by the workers due to the lockdown and to know about the measures to be taken by the government to instill confidence in the workforce. The article mentions about the various problems faced by the workforce. One is because of the lack of adequate living space, they can't maintain physical distancing norms which are mandated to control the spread of pandemic. And the second one, because of the sudden announcement of lockdown, there was complete collapse of transportation facilities. Now these people are left with no transportation facilities to reach their hometowns, and because of which many people traveled on foot, and also they lost their lives in that process. Now the third one, harassment by the police. Mostly police used to harass migrant workers at the checkpoints. Even despite of this many problems, many of the workforce reached their home places. Now there is a relaxation in the what you call in the lockdown. Now industries were not able to operate because of inadequate manpower. Now they want the manpower back. What to do? And recently a group of industrial representatives met labor minister and they sought for some relaxations. For example, they asked labor minister to persuade workers to return to work, and also the industry representatives asked the labor minister to use relevant industrial labor legislations to punish those workers who are not returning to work. And also this industrial representatives group sought for relaxations in statutory wage payments for the months of April and May, where there was a lockdown. And also there are some steps taken by the state governments like Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, even Rajasthan. For example, they increased the working hours from 8 to 12 so that the productivity can be improved. They also have used this occasion to change various labor laws. They diluted labor laws. And of course the changes that were brought in by the state governments was completely opposed by labor unions, and some argued that labor is a concurrently subject. Without the approval of central government, the state governments can't bring changes. The article also speaks about the steps that needs to be taken to bring back the workforce. Rather than tweaking the laws, the government has to instill confidence among the employees, and also they have to reorient their approach towards this urban and industrial housing so that there should be provided some adequate living space. And the workers also has to be provided with various social security measures and even minimum wage standards to bring workers back to work. Now the center has to collaborate with states, and states should not be led to take unilateral decisions regarding a subject that is present in concurrent list. And also, for example, we have ineffective laws like Interstate Workmen Act of 1979. These laws has to be reviewed, which should also incorporate some provisions to provide for the welfare of the workforce. Now we'll move on to the next article, a new architecture in quake prone areas. The article tries to emphasize the need for disaster resilient infrastructure to mitigate the effects of disasters. It also provides with various steps that needs to be taken to ensure a disaster resilient infrastructure so that the impacts of the disaster will be reduced. Now mapping of the syllabus, it comes under GS paper 3, disaster and disaster management strategy. And the learning objective is to understand the need for a disaster resilient infrastructure to mitigate the effects of the disaster. The article tries to emphasize on two things. One is prediction of disasters, and the second one is disaster resilient infrastructure. So the article says these two are very much crucial in any nation's disaster management strategy. And India is located in a seismic prone region. We have many of our cities in seismically active regions, for example Delhi. So and also we have a history of earthquakes. For example, Latur earthquake in 1993, and we have earthquake in Kutch in 2001, and also we have witnessed tsunami in 2004. So we have a rich history of earthquakes. So the fundamental requirement is we needs to have a robust prediction system. But of course, having a prediction system is not the solution. We also should have a disaster resilient infrastructure. For example, under prediction, we have a sophisticated set of monitors that are embedded beneath the soil surface at various vulnerable points. And we have installed seismographs, which provides us the frequency and velocity of various tremors and earthquakes. So based on the equipment which we have, now we are in a position to predict earthquakes. But of course, this is not the solution. We also need to have something called a disaster resilient infrastructure. And what are the measures there are three types of measures which the article is trying to say, and this is very much important from examination point of view. So there are some short term measures which are needed, some medium term, and even some long term measures. Under the short term measures, for example, vulnerable buildings has to be identified first, and plans for their occupant safety has to be made. This is a short-term measure. Under medium term, a new architecture regime has to be made mandatory for all builders and even developers. So this is a medium term requirement to ensure a disaster resilient infrastructure. And as a long term measure, it has to include a decongesting of our cities. Most of our cities are congested right now, so there needs to be something called decongestion, and also there needs to be called decentralization of capitals like that of South Africa. See, what is this disaster resilient infrastructure means? It includes two things. One is structural measures and the second one is non-structural measures. So under the structural measures, we can have engineering designs and embankments so that our infrastructure is resilient to various disasters. And under non-structural measures, we can have sensitivity planning and hazard mapping. There is a Sendai framework, which is a very important framework, even important from prelims point of view. And this framework provides for a different type of strategies to be adopted to mitigate the impacts of the disaster, and India ratified this framework, and it provides for various strategies to reduce disaster risks, and it also tries to aim at improving the disaster risk governance, and also it looks into how to strengthen a disaster resilient infrastructure too. These are some things which this Sendai framework provides for. Now we'll move on to the next article. NPCI denies breach of BHIM app data. NPCI, National Payments Corporation of India. This is a very important article. NPCI was asked in previous year prelims questions, and even BHIM app also was asked. Now what the article is trying to say is that there was a report released by VPN Monitor. This is the body which released that report. As per this report, what it is saying is that there is a breach of data under BHIM app. So some 7.6 million records of information was compromised. So this information was stored in an Amazon S3 cloud, and this was given access to the people. But NPCI is denying the claims made by VPN Monitor. That is what the issue. Now syllabus mapping, it comes under GS paper 2 governance under e-governance. The issue is about BHIM app data, and the dimension that is covered, there is a report on breach of data under BHIM app. Now what is the learning objective? To know about the breach of BHIM app data that is reported, and also to know about National Payment Corporation of India. What is this National Payment Corporation of India? It is an umbrella organization that is involved in operating retail payments and systems in India. This is what the primary function of NPCI. It is constituted under Section 8 of the Companies Act of 2013, of course, but it is a not-for-profit company. So what it is other major function is that it provides infrastructure for banking system in both physical as well as in electronic form. And this is an important development. It developed this RuPay card, like we have MasterCard and Visa card. Now NPCI has developed a RuPay card, which is an indigenous card. So this system is developed by NPCI, and it also acts as a national financial switch for all ATMs. So it is a body which monitors, which regulates all ATMs, which connects all ATMs in India. This was the question that was asked. Now we will look into about the BHIM app. Now there was a question, how many stages of authentication are there in BHIM app? Most people think it is 2 stage, but remember it's not 2 stage, there are 4 stage. You have to integrate with your mobile number, and you have to integrate with your bank account also. So it's not just a 2 stage. Okay, now regarding BHIM app, we will look into some FAQs. One is, who can use BHIM app? Any person having a bank account and a registered mobile number, and you should have a debit card. So these 3 things are needed, and it is a 24/7 payment solution, and you can send money to any bank account using the virtual address or mobile number or Aadhaar number linked to that account. Okay, so these are some things about BHIM app. Now we'll move on to the next article. This article is about the decisions taken by the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. One decision is that it increased the MSP minimum support price for paddy, pulses, and oilseeds. The next decision is the Cabinet Committee approved some 50,000 crore infusion as part of equity for MSMEs. So these are the two important decisions taken at the meeting. And also the cabinet committee approved the new definition for micro, small and medium enterprises. As per the new definition, turnover is also being used to define a particular enterprise. For example, for micro enterprise to be called as micro, the profit should be less than 1 crore and the turnover should be less than 5 crore. For a small enterprise, the profit has to be within 10 crores and the annual turnover has to be within 50 crores. And to be called as a medium enterprise, the profits has to be within 50 crore and annual turnover has to be 250 crore, less than 250 crores. Here you can look into the syllabus mapping of these articles. Now we will see how this MSP is fixed and who are the bodies involved in it. MSP, minimum support price, is given to provide remunerative prices to the farmers. Now it is announced before the sowing season. Now there is a body called Commission on Agricultural Costs and Prices. This is a technical body which is involved in calculating MSP. How they calculate MSP is that by taking into account the costs of production. And after this Commission on Agricultural Costs and Prices fix MSP, now it has to be approved and finalized by Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. So this is what the process of MSP. And recently Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs increased MSP on various kharif crops. Okay. Now we'll move on to the next article. Can allow non-profit organization to list on social stock exchange. Now there is an important decision taken by the SEBI, Security and Exchange Board of India, which allowed non-profit organizations to be listed on social stock exchange. What is the use of listing in a social stock exchange and what is the social stock exchange? And these things we'll be discussing. Of course, the decision taken by SEBI is in accordance with the idea announced by finance minister in the recent budget. So now we will look into the syllabus mapping. It comes under GS paper 2, developmental process and the development industry and the role of NGOs. And also it can be asked under GS paper 3, Indian economy, because it is all about aiming to mobilize the resources to spend on social purposes. So issue is about social enterprise, and what is a social enterprise we'll be discussing. And dimension is listing of NGOs on social stock exchange. To know about social stock exchange is a learning objective here, and also to understand the benefits this enterprise will get because of listing in a social stock exchange. Now we will see these three keywords which appeared in this article: social stock exchange, social enterprise and alternate investment funds. What is the social stock exchange? It is nothing but a platform that allows investors to buy shares in a social enterprise that has been verified by the exchange, like a normal stock exchange. Okay. Now what is a social enterprise? It is an enterprise where the business has a specific social objective. That is the primary purpose. The social objective is the primary purpose of that enterprise. It do not have commercial objective as the primary purpose. Now the social enterprises seeks to maximize profits, but at the same time they'll maximize benefits to society and environment too. Actually this makes them to be called as a social enterprise. So their profits, whatever the profits they get, they primarily use to fund some social programs. Now what is this alternate investment funds? Now the social enterprises, for example NGOs, are allowed to mobilize funds through alternate investment funds also. Then we should know what is this AIFs. AIFs are nothing but it's a privately pooled investment funds in the form of a company or in the form of a trust or in the form of a corporate body. And alternate investment funds can be from both Indian sources. Now people can mobilize funds from India as well as from foreign also. So it can be both Indian sources as well as foreign sources. But basically what it is just a pooled investment fund. Okay. Now in India, these alternate investment funds do not come under the jurisdiction of any regulatory agencies. Okay. Now we will look into some prelims questions. Now consider the following. There are 7 products given: arecanut, cotton, coffee, finger millet, groundnut, copra and turmeric. I think you know the meanings of all these products. The Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs will announce the minimum support price for which of the above. So this was a previous last prelims question. So you should know in this article cotton is there mentioned. If you read the article, cotton is there, so 2 is there, means you can eliminate C option here. Now thing is that 7 is not there. Actual turmeric is not part of minimum support price. Then if you know that, you will be in a position to answer this question. Now government all set to implement one nation one ration card scheme throughout India by 31st March 2021. What are the features of the scheme? All beneficiaries, especially migrants, can access PDS across the nation from any PDS shop of their own choice. Center will take over all the responsibility of the state and regulate all the fair price shop. And the question is, which of the above statements is are incorrect? Please read this. It is not about correct. So what could be the answer? Have a guess. Please put in the comment box. And we have done with our discussion. Thank you.